All right, what's up, Bulldogs? Today, I thought we'd do something a little bit different. I was talking with David Kaspar here, and about maybe a couple weeks ago, we were having a chat, and we just talked about a lot of interesting topics around Stoic philosophy and mindset. I think this kind of originated from when I did the video talking about evolving bulldog mindset and really focusing on what is the key thing here that I'm about, which is freedom and teaching men how to be free. So I just thought that it'd be a good idea if we had a conversation and everyone could benefit from that conversation. So yeah, so welcome, David.
Oh, thanks for having me, John.
Yeah. So yes, before we get into it, maybe talk a little bit about kind of what your background is and what you have going on.
All right. Well, for most of my adult life, I've been a professional philosopher in academia, and so from the beginning, when I got into philosophy in my 20s, one of the things that made me most excited about it was the larger than life possibilities that philosophy offered. So reading Plato and Aristotle, talking about the virtues, and it struck me that not only just that part of it, but most of what you do in philosophy, it was like unlike anything I had seen in my life. Just this idea that somebody could be completely virtuous, completely courageous, and live a life based on that, and develop that aspect of human nobility that gives someone a great life. I thought that was very attractive. And at some point in my career, in my 30s, I started to find out that things weren't going the way I wanted in my philosophy career, in my academic career.
Right.
And so then I did something which many people in philosophy would find unspeakable, ridiculous, preposterous, which is check out personal development.
Right.
Yeah. People were, we've all seen you've seen the old Tony Robbins late night videos. Okay, Tony Robbins changed my life, and so forth. And so it was always something that I thought there might be something there, because Aristotle wants us to develop ourselves. Mm. And so do these people on TV. And people are saying something's really happening by working with Tony Robbins or, Jack Canfield, Brian Tracy, some of the big names. But I had always gotten this view that it's the kinds of things you do in it are ridiculous, such as affirmations, and which was a lot of people parodied, saying, I'm great, I'm amazing.
Right.
But and so in philosophy, you do have you develop a skeptical mindset, and that's just in order to get anything published, because if you don't rigorously test your own ideas, you're going to get your papers rejected.
Right.
So what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to get a coach. I'm going to look, those books that I used to look down upon from my ivory tower. I said, let's give it a try. And I found out, okay, there's a lot of stuff that is of real value here. And so that helped me a lot, because what I wanted to do was increase my publication record, which is unessential in academia. Mm-hmm. And so I started to really get into personal development. And about a few years ago, I started to notice more discussion of Stoicism, which I had read. I had read Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, but then people were saying a lot of things about it, some of which seemed great. It can be used for success. And then some of the things they were saying, I thought they're missing something here. So I started to dig in to find out more about, well, what is Stoicism for real? And I started to research it as an academic philosopher. And over time, I started to find out not only do the Stoics give some things that many people in personal development have been lifting for decades,
Yeah.
but they have but in some ways, not in some ways, but in most ways, Stoic offers a philosophy that is, I think, superior to any other philosophy in terms of human greatness, how to be great. And so that's high performance stoicism. The program I developed, this system, it came from recognizing all this. And at some point, what happened, which to me was totally surprising, I was trying to work at a personal development system for my own personal development system, some kind of high performance system. And then I noticed on this point, okay, well, the Stoics have that. On that point, the Stoics have it. And then at some point, it was just a kind of instantaneous recognition. Stoicism took over my whole system. And my system was built on studying high performance people, many people that are well known, like Dan Pena, studying David Goggins, Brendan Bouchard, a bunch of performance psychology. And so it was fascinating to me that something I didn't intend at all, at some point I said, no, the Stoics have covered so much of this that really is the key, and it provides a unifying system for all the things that I have been learning about for years.
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting path that you went from the academic philosophy. I know that a lot of, when I studied philosophy and I looked at, just how philosophy changed from the beginning, right? From the beginning of things being more of a life philosophy to it becoming more of an analytical type of, logic and reason, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like a lot of the philosophy today is lacking the life philosophy part, which is sort of thrown out as garbage and useless because it can't be proven or tested, and it doesn't have a mathematical proof to it, and I think that's unfortunate. But yeah, going back to Stoicism and personal development, I had a similar path in terms of I was a software developer for a very long time, very analytical, mind, and I really thought that the woo-woo personal development books were ridiculous. And, especially books like Think and Grow Rich, I would, as I was starting to find some success, I would ask people, what kind of books do they recommend? And whenever I talked to someone successful and they would say Think and Grow Rich. And the first time I think I read that book, I didn't even make it through halfway. I got through a quarter of it and I threw it in the trash can. And then, later on I picked it up again because people kept on saying that book. And I still have, mixed thoughts about that book in general, but I went to a Tony Robbins seminar and I sort of said, okay, I developed this philosophy for myself, which was that, hey, it basically it's centered around this idea that I had one day, which was that if you are ignorant, you have no way of detecting your own ignorance, right? It's like, it's almost like, in Princess Bride, when it's like the iocane poison, you can't taste it or smell it, or, there's no way that you can know when you're ignorant that you're ignorant. You're ignorant of the fact that you're ignorant. And the only hint that you can have at that you're ignorant is that someone more successful than you is doing something, is saying something. And maybe you just have to have a leap of faith and see if maybe you're wrong, right? Because you have no way of knowing it. And so I sort of went on that premise. I said, okay, well, if all these people are more successful than me and they're saying this thing that seems ridiculous to me, then maybe I should just try it and see what happens and assume that I'm ignorant, not that they're ignorant, because it's less likely that all these people are ignorant. It's more likely that I'm the one who's ignorant. And when I went down that path, it completely changed my life, especially then that sort of brought me into Stoic philosophy, reading Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. And then my life dramatically changed from that point forward. And I realized, just like you, it wasn't just Stoic philosophy was a philosophy. It was the fundamental truth of life. At least that's how I see it now, is that it is just the thing that makes the most sense as human beings. And it's almost like, I almost feel like you can derive all of Stoic philosophy from this one basic truth if you understand it, and then everything else sort of flows and makes sense from that. You could almost derive it from that, just that idea of encapsulating yourself from the external world, of non-attached. I mean, I think a lot of religions and philosophies have this idea of non-attachment, but to me, that was that real powerful concept of disconnecting your internal from the external and not being subject to fate. And I feel like from that one tenet, you can derive all of the other pieces of Stoic philosophy if you just, like, anyone could do that by thinking through it. You know, how should you act? How should you behave? You know, these things like that. But yeah, that's kind of the path that I took to get here. But yeah, it's amazing how much I think Stoic philosophy is so relevant today, and so many people misunderstand it today, I think, as well.
Well, yeah, there are definitely a lot of misunderstandings, and I think you're right about what you say about academic philosophy. And on one thing that I discovered by working in ethics for years is that there's just so much literature that you have to of the literature that you have to contend with, that even to put something forth that has a chance of getting published, much of your thinking has nothing, well, isn't directly related to the larger issues of life. And so there's a challenge here for, I think, anybody who's a serious inquirer to ask, and that is, okay, so we're going to work in a domain where we think, okay, we can get definite results, but what about all the things having to do with life that are outside of that? Right. You don't want to spend your life thinking, well, I shouldn't even investigate into, just take the topic you mentioned. How do I develop non-attachment to things that are ultimately of lesser value because I'm attached to them? I care what everybody thinks. I'm worried about my bank balance every month, or what the stocks are doing, things that people normally do. How do you develop a philosophy that's going to support that if you don't, in a way, think outside of your regular day-to-day frame of mind? And so somebody has to take a chance in a way and try to live by a philosophy like Stoicism. And I think this is one thing I should say, and I would like I'd be interested in your opinion on it. I think today we're on the verge of the golden age of personal development, because so many things are coming together, and many of these are separated. There's so much work in psychology to determine, how to be more productive, to determine, okay, how to be more confident, right? So how to plan your day. There's so much of that. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of personal development, which seems to be, to some extent, a lot of even the best stuff is based on a hand-me-down approach, meaning, Jim Rohn, Tony Robbins, the next one, and so forth. But I don't know, the potential there today is great, that in one way or another, and it's probably going to be in many ways, it can be brought together. So people can support their principles with a lot of empirical research. And some testing can be done to show, all right, if you go through your day with this mindset, it's going to be much more effective for being productive than with this mindset. So I think we're on the cusp of being on the golden age, but and that's one of the reasons is it's exciting to talk about it today. So what do you think about that idea that it seems like all the elements are there to make some serious substantial advances?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that we are seeing things move in that direction where it's sort of bridging the gap between, like, a lot of the things that that we know are effective. We don't know why they're effective, but we're able to start proving some of those things out. But I also think, though, that, and this is something that I think is important for and I say this from the perspective of being someone who is analytical and just threw out all the woo-woo stuff, and then finding that what made me most effective in life and most successful was actually the woo-woo stuff,
Right.
and still keeping my analytical mind, right? I mean, obviously, but I have this philosophy, which is hold beneficial beliefs, not true ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be true, it just has to be beneficial to me, right? And I think a lot of people are always seeking the truth, and it's there. I don't think there's anything wrong with seeking the truth. I mean, that is really the realm of science, the purpose of science. But when you're so hell-bent on seeking the truth in your own personal life to questions that really can't be answered, or
Mm-hmm.
then it makes you too skeptical, and that
Right.
skepticism prevents you from effective. I mean, even when we just look in medicine, right? We don't really understand why pain relievers work, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
aspirin is not, no, there's some science that where we know a little bit about kind of how it works, but we really don't know why that it actually works to dull the pain. We don't know the exact biological mechanism, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of drugs that we take, a lot of medicine, we don't know the exact biological mechanism. In fact, a lot of times a new drug is discovered by a side effect from something that they're trying to accomplish with a different drug, or a different treatment, and then they found that it happened to work for this, and they don't know exactly why, right? So there's a lot of things that fall into that category, even just within just understanding our own biology. But I always think of it as kind of like Dumbo's feather, right? So Dumbo, did he need the feather to fly? No. Did he need the feather to fly? Yes. Right. Without the feather, he wouldn't have been able to fly, but he didn't actually need the feather to fly. But it was his belief that the feather caused him to fly that allowed him to fly. Right. I know
Right.
that's a fictional example, but I have a lot of beliefs that may not be true, but it doesn't matter. They're effective to me. Right. So, for instance, I tell people all the time that nothing bad has ever happened to me in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's a belief that
Right.
I hold. Right. It's a perspective that I have. It may not be true. I mean, I guess it depends on your perspective, but I choose to have that perspective because I know, but by having that perspective, that it is the most beneficial perspective that I could have in my life, whether it's true or not. I'm gonna choose to believe that thing. It's almost like the cargo cult idea of in the case of having a cargo cult idea. Sometimes that stuff works. Sometimes it's the same thing with affirmations. I think I read what's his name's book, Dilbert, the Dilbert, Doug
Scott
Adams.
Adams. Scott
Scott Adams.
Adams. Yeah.
Yeah. How to lose at everything and still win big, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in that, he talked about affirmations, right? And he talked about that the idea that he's very analytical too. That I don't know if affirmations have any kind of science behind them, or maybe it's the reticular activation system, or maybe it's like all these things, or maybe it's just some kind of cosmic thing. It doesn't matter, but when he did them, they worked, right? And it's like I
Right.
think that's the thing that really helped me, is because I feel like if people are looking for the evidence of everything, that they will severely limit their lives. But instead, hey, you try something, see if it works. You don't
Mm-hmm.
even need to understand how it works. You might believe it works for a totally different reason than why it does actually work, but is it effective? And so
Right.
that's kind of my view on it, is that it is good that we're getting closer, but I feel like if you wait for those things to cross over, you're going to be waiting forever, because there's so many biological things, so much in science that we know works, we don't know why, and I don't know if we'll ever find. I mean, some of the deep philosophical issues, like how do you define morality? You
Mm-hmm.
never, we will never solve that, or does God exist, and these things, and the people that are waiting for that in order to jump into action, I think we'll be waiting a really, really long time. But
Well, that is certainly true. And if they get a career, if they take up a career in philosophy, they're going to find out that people with opposing views have pretty great arguments for their positions. That's so the better you become in academic philosophy, many times it can be all the more humbling because, all right, this person who has the exact opposite view, they think everything I'm saying is wrong.
right.
Some of their points can be quite good.
Mhm.
Now you said something that that I think is very important. And I had a similar kind of pragmatic justification for affirmations because when I was starting off and I started to think, okay, well, if making this affirmation or the set of affirmations, if that improves my performance 15% for an hour, then I'm doing that, that much better on that day. And then if I do something else, such as, and there's personal development there's no shortage of techniques that you can use. So, not allowing yourself to have any negative or counterproductive thoughts, things like that. And so then that'll get you some percentage improvement. And my original thought many years ago was, all right, well, all these percentage increases are going to make what I do today better by, who knows, 5%. And people talk about 1% is enough, but once you're starting, especially, you can have some pretty quick improvements. So I think that's what makes believers of many people. But I think part of the reason I'm so excited about personal development and where that intersects with Stoicism is because I think Stoicism gives us a great way to ground some of the things that actually work. And I'll just give you one example. So reframing is a huge one. And if you talk to people that are in business, people that are coaches, people that are just in a personal development and whatever career they have, they'll talk about the importance of reframing. And actually, there's been some empirical research that this doing reframing for dealing with negative feelings, negative emotions, will enable you to act more productively than if you try to suppress them.
Right.
And so the psychologists call this cognitive reappraisal. Now, if we go back a couple thousand years, some Stoics we know, they did this. They did this. They would just say, like Epictetus, don't say I have lost it. I have given it back to the universe, right? I've given it back to nature. Marcus Aurelius says, don't say I have experienced a misfortune, that I am bearing it nobly is good fortune. And so this is what I'm drawing out one of the connections that between Stoicism and personal development. We know that reframing is helpful, and many people just do it in an arbitrary way. They can put in any content they like, and it definitely can be helpful in the way you and I have talked about. It's pragmatically beneficial. But the thing is, if you connect it with a view of the universe that you agree with, that you already believe, then I think that makes the reframing all the more powerful. Because if you're practicing Stoicism and not just using its principles here and there, then in whatever your own view of Stoicism is, you can make your reframes all the more powerful by feeding them back into something that you say, well, this is actually this perspective on the world is actually true. So, right.
Yeah, that's a really good connection between those two, with the reframing too. That's interesting because you could really say that a lot of I think a lot of what I do is reframing all the time. Right. Just like I said, like nothing bad ever happens to me. It's because it's a habit of mine to reframe everything that happens, and even in the connection, like you said, with negative emotions. One thing that I discovered about negative emotions is that my whole theory behind it, the philosophy I go by, is that negative emotions, the source of all negative emotions, is an unmet expectation. And so if you figure out what that expectation is and then release that expectation, then you don't have to experience negative emotions. Especially anger is the one that I saw George Bruno in here. He was saying about righteous anger. And by the way, shout out to George. Glad to have you here. I actually kind of disagree about righteous anger, about anger in general. I don't think anger is a productive or useful emotion at at any time. And I don't believe that you have to experience anger. That anger is always connected to an unmet expectation,
Mhm.
and that it's ridiculous to have any expectations on anything that you can't control. Expectations
Right.
are things you put on other people. Standards are things you have for yourself. And so, just like you wouldn't expect that the weather would be what you expected, what you wanted it to be, if it's expect it's not raining, you shouldn't expect that other people would behave in any fashion, or that anything in this life would happen. And I think that again comes back to Stoic philosophy. The Stoics would hold that same belief, and that would allow them to say that, to get rid of the expectations on the world, and then to not experience the negative emotions, or I mean, to be greatly diminished, because no one could do this perfectly, right? We always have
Right.
some amount of expectation, but to the degree that we let go of our expectations on things, on people, it's the degree in which we reduce our negative emotions, especially anger, right? We can always, and I think you could really call that the same thing as reframing, because
Right.
it's a very similar concept. But I think these all kind of come from this one universal truth of this idea, that you can derive all of these things. We can call it reframing. We can call it, getting rid of expectations. But it's all that's why I feel so strongly that it's this universal truth that is the fundamental truth of reality, that all of this derives from. And we get closer and closer to that with these ideas that, even Viktor Frankl, right? I mean, he said in Man's Search for Meaning, he said that between the time between a something that happens to you and your response, there's a space, and in that
Mhm.
space you can respond, instead of reacting. You can determine your interpretation of that thing, which is again the same thing. It's reframing there. So I think we see all these truths happening in all the, that point to the same exact concept, but you see that in different places because it's a universal truth, not because it's some concept that someone came up with.
Right.
And that, I think that's why, I see that. I see a lot of times all these connections between all of these different philosophies, and then and like you said, psychology, cognitive behavior therapy, all of these things that are all really just this one thing. It's just a variation of that, or a different way of describing the same concept.
Well, the some of the people and therapy, the therapy you named, cognitive behavioral therapy, and Viktor Frankl's own psychological views, they actually, and I'm sure this, you've heard this, that they actually derived their views from Stoicism. And so with Viktor Frankl, what he said about some event and your response to it. So what was the between an event and your belief on how to respond?
I think
There's a
he's
space. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's between something, an event that happens, and then your response. There's a space, and you can
Right.
hold that space. Yeah.
And so basically uh, I think Epictetus has a very simple, and it is quite an analytical way of understanding how to deal with all kinds of events. And it is, there's an appearance before your mind that something is good to do, or I have to do this, or this is important, or this person, this person is a jerk, or this is a bad situation. So there's that appearance, and then there's your assent to it, right? That's by agreeing to it, that becomes your judgment, and then that's where that's the centerpiece of where our emotional problems come from, because that's how we become overwhelmed by things, by saying, you just you're just writing a post. It was great. You spent an hour on it, and then okay, you click the wrong button. It's totally gone, and then
Right.
you think my day is ruined. But you have that thought, that appearance before your mind, and part of practicing Stoicism is you learn to take advantage of that space, that gap, in not agreeing to it. So it could come before your
Right.
mind. Yeah, it could be, but I'm not going to agree to that. There's no reason to agree with that. And one of the things that I think is important to to note about Stoicism is it's actually, you could say, a bunch of mental skills that you're developing, and you're
Yeah.
developing them over time. And like any other skill, you can become better at it by using it in more kinds of situations. And one thing that was interesting about your belief that you've never had anything bad happen to you is that comes right from the Stoic view that there are no good or bad external events.
Right.
So all good, all harm, and all benefit comes from within. So you're basically reinforcing your Stoic outlook by saying that every day, because someday you're out there and then something happens, someone cuts you off, you're late, you get a flat tire, what all the things that happen to people. By continuing to reinforce that, I would bet that in a way your mood over time is getting better and better, because we've done this before. We've had this experience before where I was tempted in my mind. I was so ready to say, okay, but this one is bad, and then no, this isn't bad. So, but
Right.
what's your experience been in terms of your, you could say, the emotional coloring of your day-to-day life? How has that changed by holding that view?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's completely changed. I really today, and it's hard. I feel like when I say this, a lot of people can't relate to it, so they think that because I have a hard time relating to what the average person experiences from an emotional perspective now. But I feel like I maybe experience maybe like 2% of negative emotions of my like
Mm-hmm.
it is such a small amount. And usually even when I do experience a negative emotion, I usually catch it so
Right.
quickly and reframe it that it barely affects me. Not to say that I don't ever have periods where I slip up or something, really catches me and I'm not prepared for it. But a majority of my life is tranquility, is peace, because I have, because I'm so cognizant now of having that space and taking that space and reframing things immediately. It's almost, and it kind of draws a parallel to, again, coming back to the same, like everything is almost the same derivative of one kind of basic universal truth of amor fati, right? The love of fate. Because
Mm-hmm.
with that, in order for you to say nothing bad happens to you, or there's nothing good or bad, you have to really say that you love everything that happens and that you don't want it to be any other way. And it's the best way it possibly could have been, because it's the only way that it could have possibly been. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but that's kind of the viewpoint that I have. And because of that, I'm always able to take whatever happens and see it as good. Right. If I, for example, use the instance of if I was writing a post all day and then it got deleted, then I would see that as, this is, there's several good things about this. One is that here's my chance. I mean, the universal, I think, catch-all is, here's my chance to practice stoicism and emotional control. And this is good
Right.
because when tough things happen, it makes me stronger. So good. I have an experience to be able to test that. I could say also that now I get to rewrite this thing over, and the second time is almost always better than the first, especially if you've
That's
done
true.
the work to do it. But you don't want to do it the second time. So the fact that I was forced out of my hands and I have to do it is actually a beneficial thing, because it made it so that I'm going to produce a better product than I would have, because I might have been lazy and not done a second draft. Right.
Right.
So, I think that there's, that's kind of the way that I operate, is to just look for all those pieces. And then also at the same time, I think the other part of it is letting go of that, like I said, the expectations. Because the market point in my life where my emotional state dramatically shifted from
Mm-hmm.
where I would say I spend about 50% of my time in envy, sadness, uh, guilt, what other, anger, I'm trying to think what other emotions, feeling resentment, like all of these things, right? About half my time was spent there. But where it shifted to the like 2 or 3% that I say now was when, and it's kind of funny because it was actually a Tony Robbins event. He said that the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably live with is in direct proportion to, or sorry, I just skipped it now. The quality of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably live with. And when I heard that, that's where I started realizing, it was kind of around that time frame, that I was not going to allow other people to put expectations on me, and I wasn't going to put expectations on other people. I was just going to accept whatever happened and accept the consequences of what actions I did. And when I did that, and I relieved myself from the expectations of other people and not putting them on other people, then I got to a point where I was able to then reframe all those things and not be upset and not get angry and feel those negative emotions. So it really shifted, and it's a dramatic change. I can't even describe how different my life became from that point forward. But in something that I feel like everyone has the power to do, but very few people want to do this. And it does require the practice, I think, like you said, in the sense that you have to get to that point where when things happen, you take the time, you take the space, instead of reacting, you respond. So you wait, you say, all right, let me interpret this thing, how that's going to be in a positive way. That's going to, how is everything working for me? And then once you have that take on it, now you can respond, and and then you quickly develop that skill set over time. And as you become quicker and quicker at that, the less you're affected by negative emotion. And that's right. Kind of where I feel like I had to get to, and it's still a process. I'm still evolving. I'm still becoming better at doing that.
Right. And the practice done repeatedly becomes nature. That's one of the precepts that the Stoics viewed, and it was an ancient Greek precept. Now, one thing that I said earlier in terms of the untapped potential for Stoicism, one thing I set out to do a few years ago in terms of understanding everything that's involved in Stoicism is what I didn't limit what part of it I'm going to study. And the reason for that is because there were certain things that, because of personal development, that I could connect quickly with Stoicism and say, okay, this is, Jack Canfield's telling me to reframe, and so did Epictetus. And so by getting into Stoicism, I can explore this more deeply. But here's one of the things that is, and so let me just say that I'm still applying this idea of yours that let's look for beneficial beliefs. Are they true? I'm not sure, but I think you might be interested in a theory that is from the Stoics, but I've developed it a little more fully in terms of why you're actually getting better at doing this. And the Stoics have their view of the soul or the psyche is it's a kind of physical entity, and their belief was that each of us is a portion of Zeus. And so, okay, well, the next thing to note is that what holds us together as a human being and what holds our soul together, the Stoics have a whole philosophy of this idea of tension, because they were fascinated with how does a human being's body hold together? How does a table hold together? And they had this idea that it's tension. There's a tensional movement going outward and a tensional movement going inward. That's what holds us together. All right, so what does this have to do with improving and becoming more virtuous? The Stoics say, and this is especially the early Stoics, rather than the late Roman Stoics that most of us read. They claimed that a person becomes virtuous when they've developed the tension in their soul to a much higher state. And Chrysippus said, because the psyche or the soul is physical, they said some souls are flabby, most souls are flabby and weak, and the soul of a virtuous person, the soul of a wise man, it is strong because they've built up the tension in their soul. So basically, they apply the same principles of you probably heard of this time under tension in terms of developing your muscles. It's the same exact thing in developing your soul to become stronger. And this works out in very surprising ways because, and so here's the part of the theory that everything I told you, you can find it, in the scholarly literature, but here's my hypothesis. I think this fits everything we know. How you become stronger is being in tension situations.
Right.
And tension situation after tension situation, when things go wrong, and then you're able to reframe and be able to deal with it, focus on the solution, not on the problem, right? One of the things that, and so what happens is, in order to become a very powerful person, to become great, you have to be in so many high tension situations. And when you read a biography of someone great, right? So, pick a general, pick a statesman from the past, and read about their life. The way we read a biography of whoever, De Gaulle, you think, oh, he went through this obstacle and that obstacle, and then that's how he became, that's how he came to be the giant political figure in his country. That's part of it, but it's actually he became great through all the tension situations. And Epictetus in the Discourses, he says, if Hercules did not face a lion and a hydra and unjust and brutal men, he would not have been a Hercules.
Right.
So some of the things, because I think one of the reasons to stress that is because many people have trouble understanding your claim. Okay, how can it be that only 3% of my life negative emotions are coming across my mind? That's hard to understand. And then if you say, okay, if you just reframe and think about it differently, they're saying, how can thinking about it do that? But another ingredient is when you're in situation after situation and you use a perspective that is actually helpful so that you can be strong in the situation and endure it, that's what's going to build you up. You are toning up your soul. You are making your psyche stronger and stronger and more skillful over time. So whether that view of the psyche is true or not, it gives us a good visual way of seeing, okay, now I know why I'm getting stronger. And that's I think a fascinating Stoic theory on that.
Yeah. I agree. I like that. That's interesting. And that, I mean, that's a good example too of something that obviously was not correct in the sense that the way that they thought it worked, but it still worked, right? There's still the idea,
Right.
even though, but everything is a model. I think that's another way to look at it. Is right. Is like they used a model for the human soul and the strengthening of the human soul, right? Or strengthening yourself. And it was an inaccurate model, but no models are accurate. Even when we look at the atomic model of an atom, right? We see the drawing of an atom and an electron cloud. I mean, before it used to be an electron, going around the orbit of,
Right.
of the nucleus, which if it was actually to scale, it would not look at all like that. That's right. Or we have the electron cloud, model of the atom, but even all those things are not accurate. They're just models that, so everything is there is really, when we get down to the final piece of it, is it's still a model, it's still an approximation for the actual real truth, which we'll never actually uncover. But I think one thing that I would add to that, because I've thought along the same lines as what you said, in terms of these things that make us stronger because we endure those things. But one of the big arguments that I get from people, especially guys, because when I was telling them, hey, go out there and talk to women, because if you do that, then you'll become more confident. And then a lot of guys would say, well, that's not true, because see, if I go and talk to a bunch of women and they reject me, then I'll be less confident. And I had to grapple with that. I was like, well, why is that true for some guys? Why is it not true for some guys? And I think one piece I would add to what you said is that it I want to say it like one thing I always talk about is this idea that you have to willingly bring pain upon yourself, right? If it's thrust upon you, there's no growth, or there's very little growth. But if you go out and seek the pain, then there's growth. It's almost like you have to put your hand into the fire. If your hand is burned in the fire, it doesn't avail you much, right? But if you actually step into it, if you walk into it, and I think maybe even a more subtle distinction might be the idea that it's the perspective that you have when you're enduring, right? So, because a lot of bad things happen to people and it beats them down and they become defeatist in life. And as a result of adversity, they don't become stronger, they become weaker. But then there's other people who experience adversity and become stronger. And I think the key difference is, one, the people that experience adversity and become stronger, they willingly face the adversity, or they willingly even brought it upon themselves or walked into it. And the mindset that they had in dealing with that adversity was that it was a good thing, not that it was a bad thing that they were just trying to get through, that they used that to actually sharpen themselves and make themselves better. Because I feel like if you just have bad things happen to you, and you don't have the right mindset, it will crush you, it will hurt you, it won't actually build you up. But to really strengthen the soul, you've got to have the viewpoint. And when you have that viewpoint that, hey, this is a good thing, you've reframed the thing, or by default, if you bring pain upon yourself, you already have to have had that, right? It's like, I learned so much, I grew so much as a person by doing long distance running, because when you run a marathon, when you're out there for hours running, you're subjecting yourself to that adversity, or you're going without food, like doing fasting, and again, Stoics practice going without and doing those things as well. And I think, but by willingly doing those things myself, that, as if I put myself in an uncomfortable situation, it expands my comfort zone, but it also makes me stronger as a person. So I think there is a piece to that you have to have either willingly done it, or if it is thrust upon you, that you have to have the mindset that this is a beneficial thing, not a harm. Otherwise, I think then you experience something that actually brings you down instead of bringing you up.
Well, I think that the people that were arguing that with you, they didn't put themselves in enough situations to try to see it for themselves. Since they're inquiring, they're trying to find out what's true. The way to find out is, well, just give it a try, do it enough times to see what actually happens. And then I think, because otherwise it's going to be very hard to convince them. So just a couple points on what you said to add to it. And that is a great point, that choosing this, if I go out and run a marathon and then I'm experiencing a lot of pain, and okay, but I made it through the marathon, even though, I hit the wall, I had to walk for 5 minutes. I thought I was going to be sailing through to the end. Whatever the story is, that makes it all the sweeter if you make it through. One thing to point out, when people talk about this, it's called the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us, some things are not up to us. Many people take the only issue related to that as being acceptance in terms of the things that are out of your control. But actually, the Stoics have a couple different ways of dealing with it. And one of them is to look down upon something that's out of your control. And Epictetus says this literally in the Enchiridion, the path to the freedom that I'm telling you about is to despise the things that are not up to you. And so I'm experiencing pain at this point. I'm running and I'm experiencing these aches. To despise them and say, well, and so here's where the difference between having a soul and a body for the Stoics as a pragmatic model comes in. Well, actually, I'm looking down on what's happening to my body. I know I can make it. There's no imminent threat of serious physical damage. So I'm looking down on it, and that's something warriors have to learn how to do anyway. And everybody that wants to improve can do that. The second thing is my way of, I think explaining Stoicism to people in the 21st century, what's the essence of it? It's a process of perspective shaping. Mm-hmm. And the perspectives have to do with many different things, like some things are up to us, some things are not up to us. I am a part of a much greater whole. At some point, my lifeline will end, right? And some of these are necessary truths that no one will dispute, so you can be confident in them. But here's a thought I had about Stoicism being a process of perspective shaping over time, so you can become a high performance person, so you can move toward greatness. And that is, I call it your effective perspective. Mm-hmm. So we can all watch a movie. All right, Jason Statham, here comes the bad guys at the gas station, and they're going to beat him up. And when you're with your buddies and you're talking about the movie, you're watching the movie alone. Oftentimes you will say, well, if I were in that situation, here's what I would do. So yes, you can adopt that perspective, but your effective perspective is, if you're actually in that situation, in a scene where some tough guys come up to you, that you see it the same way. And I think that's where a lot of people get fooled, especially in our virtual reality saturated age.
Right.
Because we find so many occasions to think, if I were in this situation, I would do that. But you have to put yourself in more tension situations to see, would I really have that perspective? So the people that work with you that are doing some martial arts, they're doing their sparring, they're getting a better sense of, okay, now I see what's really involved. So I could have that perspective, but you still don't know. That's why everything we're talking about is hard work, because it's easy to say, oh, I've changed my perspective. I read this book, I'm seeing things differently. But my view is, you have to put yourself in some serious tension situations, the ones you don't want to go in. And then that's really what's going to be, in a way, that is the secret missing ingredient to really get rolling on improving yourself. So
yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was talking to someone, I was telling them about how it's like, because part of the reason why I did fasting and one meal a day, it wasn't just for the health benefits, but it was because of the mental toughness aspect of it. And when I was fasting and running, ridiculous miles and working, doing, all of that in one day, it just made everything else. When someone would complain about being hungry or some kind of someone insults me on the internet, it just made that seem so trivial to me, right? Because I think it's like you're saying, is if you put yourself in a worse situation, you might not be able to put yourself in that exact situation, but in a worse one, then all of those things become small. Then everything becomes, everything becomes a small problem, right? Because you put yourself into bigger situations, more painful situations, more higher tension situations. And so that's kind of the thing that I try to do, is to put myself into those places so that I'm prepared. And it makes you more prepared for life, right? It makes you more resilient for life. It was like, I was having this conversation with my my daughter, because she, very much was like, she's 11 and like all these things are, she really has a victim mindset right now. And I've been telling her about, like, because we went for this 4-hour hike up this mountain, and she was just whining on the, she's just like, and it was like, I was telling her about how, like, when you do those things, it makes the other things it makes your life easier, right? Because all of these things that greatly affected you emotionally in your life, now they don't have to, because you have it in perspective. Like, you have a perspective of what is actually hard and what is actually difficult in life, and you've already overcome those things. So these things are smaller in comparison. I think even the same thing just with pain threshold, right? Mm-hmm. I was going for a run in one of the mountains here, and I fell while while I was running down the mountain. It's pretty dangerous. A lot of times you're going to fall, and I rolled and scraped up my arm and my leg, and and then I was bleeding a little bit, but I just got back up and started running again. And I was thinking about how when I just did that just by instinct, that I could feel the pain, but to me it was small. It didn't matter. But I was thinking about how kind of, let's say that someone I knew, just the average person, fell down and just scraped themselves up, they would stop, would be in bit of a panic, would be walking down the rest of the taking some time. They would have a totally different reaction. And it was just because I had experienced so many other things that to me it wasn't a big deal, right? Even though and I think it's the same thing you could even apply to the emotional, like we talked about feeling negative emotions. And as you put yourself through that exercise, and you put yourself into those difficult situations, then all of those things start to become so much smaller. And I think that's really some of the things that I really value in Stoic philosophy, that have really helped me so much in my life, is just like it's the reason why you do hard things, is to make the rest of your life easier. And that is, you see that so much in the Stoics. And when you practice that, it's like you said, you can't, until you actually practice that, you can't really have that perspective. But once you do practice it, then you see it, then it just becomes what it is.
And here's something that that I learned a long time ago, that it wasn't a thought I didn't want to have. It wasn't a thought I wanted to have, because let's take social situations. When there's some event that you have a chance to go to, and for your job, or maybe it's some people on social media, and you say, I really don't want to see this person or that person. A couple people I like are there. Well, you don't have to start with something heroic. If you want to become better with your social skills, go to a gathering you don't want to go to. Right. See how you do. Not everything has to be a high impact tension situation. It could be something as little as that. And if you say, well, same with, I really don't want to go to the gym today, then that could be all the more reason to go, because, that's what you need to do. And one thing that, so the example you gave about fasting, that's a great approach, because, there's a health benefits, there's a diet benefits, but also your training. And I think that word should be stressed for everybody, because it's really hard to get off the track of wanting everything in life to be about getting something.
Right.
And if you substitute for that training, it can be in little ways, then you can start to enjoy your life a lot more. And I actually think your life can start to become fun, and that's not a word many people associate with stoicism. And that's partly the fault of the Stoics. But I would say, because they did talk a little about playing ball. Epictetus said Socrates was a good ball player because he knew how to take events and use them well. But if you think of your part of your day as just training, let's say my commuting part of the day, that's a good one. There's bad drivers, there's you miss a bus, all kinds of things that can help you to start training. But I would even add doing things to trip yourself up a little, because so for example, if you have a 20-minute trip to work, your route, throw in a chore in the middle of it, and then see if you can do it. Make a game out of it, and then challenge yourself a little. And sometimes I'm not going to eat breakfast. I'm not going to eat lunch, even if I'm not fasting, just to mess myself up a little. And militaries have been doing that kind of thing for thousands of years, to trip people up a little, to take them out of their ordinary routine, to see you can do it. And this brings about another great Stoic point, which is you have the virtues within you.
Mm-hmm.
You have the resources within you. And the way I like to put it is, courage in some kind of incomplete form is in there. It's waiting for you to act on it, take courageous action until it becomes your whole way of being, your unalterable disposition as a virtue. But in the meantime, people find courage out of the blue in all kinds of situations. And so if you can come up with things in your day-to-day life, including, and I think this is a big one for many people with jobs, I'm going to tell the person at work who pushes me around, I'm going to tell them to stop it today. I'm going to tell them I'm not going to do it. And just challenge yourself in these little ways, and then you'll start to see, okay, no, John was right. By challenging myself in this little way and seeing I survived it, and that's going to be one step of perspective change where nothing bad happened. I was surprised. Nothing bad in terms of what I imagined.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting about the courage thing too, because one thing that I always focus on is the idea that fear you can't control. Fear is an emotion. It is part of the primal part of your brain. You can't block it out. You can't make it go away. You can't choose to not be afraid. It is not within your control, right? A fear is a response that you have. Now you can do some things to make it so that fear response is dulled in the future, but at the moment, you have no control over it. But courage is always a choice, and it's always available to you at any given time. And it is like a muscle that the more that you use it, the easier it is to use. But any person at any moment can choose to have courage, because that is a choice, whereas fear is not a choice. And so taking that choice, and I think just when I realized that, there's a book called Feel the Fear, Do It Anyway.
Right.
And when I realized that was a powerful thing in my life, because I realized that, yeah, I couldn't control fears. And my whole strategy was trying to manage, control fears, get rid of fears. Never works. But I always, at any moment, had the choice to have courage if I chose it in that moment. And that made me go out of my comfort zone and expand myself in many different ways, because I realized that before, what I felt was happening to me was out of my control, because it's driven by fear. But once I realized that it was in my control and I just had to make that choice, then it empowered me, and I was able to do that. And then even just like you said, on the small things, one of the things that I practice too is, for example, if I get up in the morning, I get up at 5:40 to go for my run, and I didn't get enough sleep the last night, right? So maybe I only got 3 or 4 hours of sleep and I'm really tired. Then my immediate reframe is, oh, this is a good opportunity to, because now this run will be harder. Like, this is a good opportunity to test, to see, I'm going to get myself up, and I'm training. I'm getting myself, it's a benefit. I'm reframing it as training. It's making me tougher. This is, because when it's just a normal morning, it's still a workout, but now here's a golden opportunity to really test my resolve and to test me and make me stronger. And so that's how I look at those things. Even sometimes, like you said, tripping myself up, I'll go for a run and not take any water. And it won't be like a super danger, but it's definitely uncomfortable running for 10 miles without any water. And so I'm fasted and I'm not drinking water, this time around, or if I have to run in the hot sun, that's definitely not ideal, but hey, there's a good test there too as well, right? I get to experience this, this is a benefit. I'm training, right? All these things you can look at. And even I think the other part too is the part that I feel like a lot of us can really grow is emotional training by dealing with difficult people. Right? I know Marcus Aurelius talked about this a lot, but that was one thing, especially when you're trapped in a situation where you have to deal with someone who is just a bore, who is completely emotionally unstable, inconsiderate, and then trying to figure out, how do I deal with that? Like, it's a lot of people see it as a negative, but you can see it as a positive as you're training. right? It's like, okay, because if you can handle this person and not get upset and not let them get to you and not let them derail you, then you're growing in that way. And I think that was a huge one for my life too. It's just when I made that shift and I realized, when someone's being an ass, this is an opportunity. I get to
Right.
test myself, and I'm going to train myself. And because you don't have enough ass, I'm like, maybe I need some more assholes, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot rather than trying to avoid it, it's like, okay, well, let me see the most obnoxious person I could deal with, and be forced to deal with that person, because that is really gonna, it's really gonna help me with my emotional resilience and my emotional mastery if I can handle that. But yeah, I think viewing it all as training is a key thing, because when you start looking at it that way, then you can really reframe things very easily, because almost anything can be training, and that's the ultimate reframe.
That's right. That's right. And the Stoics the Stoics put forth the idea that to look for the upside of every situation, and there actually always is one. I haven't failed to find some upside, no matter what happens, even if it's not that great. But there's a phrase that they use, which is turn each situation to good account. Yeah. And the way you're turning it to account, good account is, you could describe it as your internal action, because once you meet someone who's really hard to deal with, they're totally irrational, then, and you see it as, okay, this is a training for me. And I think you'd agree that in that situation, it actually becomes a little fun. How can I handle this? How can I find a key to deal with this person in the situation? And so, and this connects with the idea that I mentioned at the beginning of Stoicism having so many great resources. I've boiled it down to 4 things to keep in mind before you get into any situation with human beings. And the first one is the one you could say, okay, this might just be pragmatically a good pragmatic belief. All right, this will help me. But I found it's been very useful. Every human being is my brother or sister, right? We all come from Zeus. But then after that, each person acts on their apparent self-interest. That's number 2. Number 3, everybody is a fool except the sage. So I'm a fool, and this person's a fool. And apparently this person seems to be more of one, the way they're carrying on. And then lastly, and in some ways, this is the most helpful one, that's how it appears to them. They can't act on how it appears to you, but they're acting on how it appears to them. And each of us is the same way. Because if we do a laboratory study for the people watching this, and then we do a little visual, we show, okay, here's Trump, here's Hillary Clinton, right? Most people are going to have some kind of visceral reaction, right? Unless they've been developing their Stoic practices for a long time. But the thing is, you can't get someone out of how it seems to them, and this is something that, because I'm interested in philosophy, I'm interested in rational discussion. It took me many years to embrace this, but when I discovered it's true for me, once I have my, they come across to me this way, for the time being, that's how they're going to seem to me, and that's going to condition my responses. So if someone's being a total asshole with you, there's something about the situation, something about you, whether rational or not, and since they're a fool, it's probably irrational because you're a friendly person. That's why they're acting that way. And then there's nothing you can really do to talk them out of it. So with those things in place, you can calm down a little and say, okay, then you can face a situation kind of as a practical puzzle. How do I diffuse a situation given that? And it's much easier with those points in mind than if you, because most of the time we think, why am I trying to convince this person? on some level, I'm presupposing I can use a rational discussion to convince them. But if somebody's really that hard to deal with, that's absolutely false.
Right. Yeah. There's very few people that will listen to reason, and there's very few reasonable people, and that I think that's true. But yeah, I like those 4 points. What the way that I look at it is almost the same thing. I just call it something different. Is I say that everybody is an NPC, right? So non-player character in a video game, and they're just running their code, right? So they have a program and they're running the program. It's the code that they're wired to run. And so it's not personal. And it frees me in two ways. In one way, I don't care what they think about me because they're just an NPC running their code. So I don't need to be embarrassed. I don't need to be shy. I don't need to worry about other people's judgment because it doesn't matter. They're just part of the software. They're just running their code. And then second, like you said, it helps in the sense that I don't know. I don't feel like I can convince them. I don't have to convince them of anything. And I don't have to take any kind of offense. It's not personal. I can look at it from a strategy standpoint. It'd be kind of silly if you're playing a video game and you're communicating or dealing with an NPC and you start to get personally offended that NPC was out to get you, or or get upset at that NPC if it attacked you or killed you or whatever in the video game, because it's just running the code. It doesn't make any sense. Your anger is ill-directed because it's not, but I think viewing everyone as that is really useful, because in reality that is really true. Is people are running the programming that they have in their brain. It's their perspective. It's, if you were, one thing that was, I think, powerful from Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends, Influence People, is he said, if you had their genetics and you had their life experience, you would think exactly the same way they do, right? Mm-hmm. You would think the same thing. You would act the same way. And I think when you realize that, then it's like, wow, well, you can't really blame someone for what they're, you can make your choices and to interact with them or not interact with them or how to interact with them, but you can't blame anyone because they are just a product of their DNA and their environment. I mean, that's a good way of looking at it. And so, yeah, but yeah, that's kind of how I deal with that. And then, like you said, it's a good challenge, look at it as a chessboard, and how can I make the best move to get what I'm to accomplish the goal that I'm trying to accomplish in this situation, instead of taking it personal.
Well, and it's interesting because I don't know about you, but recently I've had a couple good screwings in terms of getting screwed over. And so part of another factor connected with what you're saying that frees you up is understanding. And so, if you say, this is an NPC, and then, okay, the way this person has been programmed is to be insane in terms of the outrageous thing they're doing.
Right.
I've had in the past couple of years, I've had a couple interesting experiences where the more outrageous someone's story is, their scheme or their the angle they're using or the lies that they tell to cover themselves, the more outrageous it is, the less reason to be offended.
Right.
Because how do you get to that state where you take a situation that could be more or less mutually beneficial, and then you decide to, do something that you think is going to be to your advantage, but you're tying yourself in knots in terms of your beliefs, and and so that's an important thing that I think is under discussed in Stoicism, and that is, so a lot of people talk about all good comes from within, but so does all harm. Mm-hmm. And that means that the people that are doing really nasty things or really foolish things, they're actually harming themselves. In some cases, it's so bad you could say they're destroying themselves. And I've heard some stories where I told the person, that person, that man is destroying himself. Did he recognize that? and they thought about it, what doing that to your psyche is that's a pretty frightening thing, and adds an even fuller dimension to why not take it personally, because wow, look at what they're doing to themselves.
Yeah.
And they're almost surprised that if you're not outraged by what they've actually done, because they're expecting it at some point.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. I think that, based on that too, part of it is that, well, if I look at even at my own life, right? And I think we can all probably reflect on this. The harm that other people have, quote, done to me, I don't believe anyone can really do harm to you. You choose to allow yourself to be harmed. But the bad things that, that people would say that other people have done to me, none of those things have harmed me as much as the bad things that I have done to other people have harmed me.
Right.
Right. I've spent way more time feeling pain over things that I have done than the things that have been done to me. And that's because the things that have been done to me didn't in any way diminish or destroy me. It's the things that I have done that really weakened my soul. And it's interesting too, because a lot of guys, a lot of times, when I'm doing videos on my channel and I'm trying to implore the guys that follow me to do the right, quote, the right thing, I never take it from a moralistic perspective, because you might not agree with my moral, and I don't need to preach to you, and that's never a good, but always from a self-preservation perspective, and the idea that you don't do harm to other people because in effect it harms you. It harms your psyche. I think so many people don't realize that, is that you can be selfish and not harm other people because you're selfish, because we are all selfish, because we all look out for our best interest. It's just, and that kind of brings down to the, what I think is I don't believe there's evil in the world. A lot of people get upset when I say this, but I believe that everything stems from a lack of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And if people who, quote, are evil or did evil had the awareness of knowing what their actions were, not just what they're doing to other people, because that doesn't even matter in terms of self-interest, but what they were doing to themselves by doing that, how they're destroying themselves, they wouldn't do it. It's because they don't know that, they haven't made that connection. And I think a lot of times we try to shame people, especially in society today and cancel culture and all these things. We try to shame people into changing their actions, but thinking that because if we make them aware of how they're harming other people, it will cause them to change. And that's the wrong take. It doesn't. It just makes them defend themselves more and more adamant about what they're doing, because what we need to make them aware of is how they're harming themselves. And if they understood that, if they had the acknowledgement of that, if they had the awareness of that, that would change their actions instantly. But
Right.
we all do things that are wrong, not because of a desire to do evil. I've never met an evil person, but we do it because of lack of awareness. Even the crazy person who is ridiculous and hard to deal with and seems hell-bent on destroying everyone and destroying themselves in the process, and it's like, why are they doing this? It's because they just lack awareness. It's not malice. It's not, it may feel like that, but in reality, it's just that they lack the awareness. They don't understand. Just like, I mean, even, Jesus said that, right? He's when they literally nailed him to the cross, he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And that was the thing, that was, he was saying, hey, they lack awareness. If that's why they're doing it. And that's why don't even hold them accountable for what they're doing, because they lack awareness. And so I think that's something I think about a lot too, is just, and I think that also is a good reframe that helps me to not be angry at people, to not react to people, to not be hurt by other people and upset and put expectations on them, is that I realize that the harm, that whatever they're doing, it's just because they're lacking awareness. And if they had that awareness, they wouldn't do it. And any good that I do, that I don't harm myself or harm other people, it's because I have awareness. And I, some of that awareness, maybe you could say, you could attribute some of it to myself being in thought as a philosopher and thinking through things, but much of it was just random luck that that I encountered these things in my life, encountered these people, encountered these experiences that gave me the awareness. So even that I can't really credit myself. as having. And so in the same token that I can't credit myself for having the awareness that I have, I can't really discredit someone for lacking the awareness.
Well, I think I agree with your approach of when you tell people to do the right thing, there could be a moral dimension to it, or there might not be. And it's interesting because what the Stoics call acting with right reason, it covers so many things that have nothing to do with morality. And I think what many people miss about this idea of virtue is, for us, it's necessarily moral. And the Stoics would agree that if you're a virtuous person, you are completely just. But there's so much space in the primary virtues or the cardinal virtues that have to just do with the excellence of your soul. And for many things that, we were talking about courage. The primary beneficiary of courage for much of your life is yourself. Right. Even if you're doing things with the ultimate aim of what's good for society, you're going to benefit more in some ways from having courage than other people will. So this is a point I'd like to stress because the name of the game for the Stoics is you want to make your soul so excellent and ultimately perfect reason with every thought you have, with every action you take. And I think in a way that's the hardest part about Stoicism, that no thoughts or actions don't count.
Right.
Everything counts. And it's normal. It's other points of view. Other points of view at least give you time to, mentally screw around or say, well, this time I can have a bad thought about my neighbor, or I can be nasty to this person in a business situation or someone in customer service. But one thing that you said that this again goes under pragmatically valuable. And so John, I'm from New Jersey. You're from New Jersey. When you're having a tough time with somebody, and in a business meeting, it could be on the phone or in person, and same with somebody you're dealing with, some company, some vendor, and they're totally wrong. Right. But especially today, you're going to have to go through a maze to really get the kind of attention or redress you deserve. But never in my life have I, even when I come up with the perfect response on sock them back, give them a shot in the jaw back, even if it's devastating, it's on target, it's accurate. I've never had a situation where my day was better for doing that than if I were completely polite and, trying to find out more information and, okay, who can I talk to now? Even though it's going to be it entails a much longer process in terms of dealing with other people. I think the number one reason, and this leads up to the question of what are we actually going for? We're going for eudaimonia, right? Which flourishing or happiness. And one point to stress on this is it's actually something that is ascribed to your life, not to your mental state at any moment. And so to attain that, then Stoicism requires, no, I'm going to do the right thing, which is, even if in this situation I feel morally justified in, unloading on someone, I'm going to refrain. I'm going to try to find another way. And that is another challenge. And, it's not always a challenge that I'm excited about accepting, but in my experience, when I'm done with the situation, I am better for it than I would be if I, blast them. I don't know about you. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I agree 100%. In fact, I mean, especially what you said about how it's just a thing that you do. It's applied to your entire life, right? So it's almost like there's no breaks from this. This isn't just something. And I think a lot of religions are predicated on the idea of good behavior or doing the right
Mhm.
things, and it's that comes from a restraint. And when we operate out of restraint, it's a better level. It's almost like the primal level is that we do what we want to do. We don't think about the consequences, right? We harm ourselves and harm others. A total lack of awareness. The second level might be operating out of a restraint. We don't harm people. We don't do the thing. We don't yell into the phone because we know that it's not going to be good, and we want to do it, but we still lack some kind of awareness when we still want to do it, right? It's
Right,
only at that highest level where we have the full awareness where we don't even want to do it because
right,
we are totally aware and totally believe that it's not the right thing and that it won't avail us and it won't benefit anything, and we acknowledge, and not just our own looking into ourselves, because I think at the second level you're looking into yourself and realizing if you do this it will cause you harm, but I think at the higher level you're looking not only into yourself but into them, and not holding them accountable or blaming them for the actions that they're doing, like we talked about them being an npc, or the four tenets that you had, is it's like they just lack that awareness, and so it's not
right.
even really their fault, and that's where you truly, I think, have that peace, right? But I think that a lot of people are operating in that restraint, and again, like I said, I think one of the harmful things I see in a lot of religions or religious people is that they're trying not to sin, right?
Hmm.
Their identity hasn't shifted to a point where they want the good things, right? They want the bad things. They're trying to avoid from doing the bad things, and that is something that you always wrestle with. And then get and the problem with that is that given the freedom, right? I'll give you a good example from the chat, not to pick on anyone here, but earlier on, the comeback dad said, yes, or if you eat healthy most of your life, your old years can be more enjoyable than eating crap most of your life. And maybe I misinterpreted what he said, but I was taking this as he was saying that, eat healthy most of your life, and then your old years, you can eat crap and enjoy it. I don't know if that's what he meant, but that's what I think a lot of people have, that perspective, right? It's like I can work hard during the day or during the week, and then I can party on the weekends, right? And it's this kind of idea that I'm going to restrain myself instead of actually truly accepting that this is the better thing to do, right? So for
Hmm.
example, you could take that, whether he meant it or not that way, but with eating, some people say, okay, well, I eat healthy so that I can eat junk later on. But that's the wrong perspective, because
Right,
in that perspective, what you're doing is you're just restraining yourself. You're not truly living. You're not truly bought into the idea of eating healthy, right?
right,
You're just stopping yourself from doing the bad. But if you truly are really bought into it, the same thing, like I said, with interacting with people, then you kind of get past that point. But you're right. I mean, we know it. I think intrinsically that when we as my fiance, we joke about, we're with my daughter about, don't fight fire with fire, because then everybody's on fire, right? We know
hmm,
that to be true. Yet we still have this urge to fight fire with fire, and that's the thing, is the difference between, I think, the action in your life. If you still have the urge, you still have work to do, right?
right,
Even though you've made some progress and not actually unleashing the fire, but I think that's the thing that we should strive for, because, and the reason why I say that too is because that's when we have the true internal peace. Is because
hmm,
if we still have the urge to fight fire with fire, then even though we may restrain and prevent bad things from happening, and we will feel better later, but we still don't have the inner peace, because that turmoil still exists within us. And
right.
that's kind of the thing, I think, that that I think is maybe the evolution, like the final. It almost is sort of I say this kind of the marriage between stoicism and Buddhism, is this idea that you're what you really should be trying to do is not just do the right things, but get to the point where your desires have been changed, so
Right.
that it's not just that you do them, but that's actually what you want.
Well, so and here's this. This brings up an important point about virtue, because as I understand what the Stoics are doing, as I understand what Aristotle and Plato are doing, when they talk about this disposition of the soul or the state of the soul that we call your character, and when we talk about the highest development of your character, which is virtue, I think there are four things that come out of let's just go with virtue. So if you are virtuous, you have this state of character which will have you do things that are, let's just say, courage. If you're courageous, you will do courageous things. You will feel as a courageous person feels. You will want things as a courageous person does. And then lastly, you will have the perspective of a courageous person. And like I said before, what's distinctive about the Stoics is their approach to becoming courageous is, I'm changing my perspective, which is not to say I'm not taking action, but when you described this idea of, I'm going to do this now for this payoff later, part of that's, again, the outlook on life of, I'm going to get it. It's, here's my investment to get some outcome, whatever it might be. And what we're describing is, well, that's not going to be the better perspective. The better perspective is a kind of training perspective, and hopefully and gradually transform your soul so that, okay, so the way I feel in a social situation compared to last year, I feel more comfortable. What I want is actually more mature. I feel less nervous about it, and my perspective is, it's not a big deal. So all four of those are there, no matter what your personality is like, no matter what stage you're at. But one thing that I think an interesting tie-in to, I know what you do, John, in terms of helping men to become more powerful, stronger in life. As we were talking about you go ballistic on someone in a situation when really it's going to be better for you on all points to try to handle it rationally and calmly. There are a lot of images out there, and it could be, in different markets or domains. It could be, different names, but people will talk about, okay, I'm going to be a rock star in business. I'm going to be a high performer. I'm going to be an alpha male. And I think some of the images that people get from thinking about these concepts is going to be, I'm going to be angry and aggressive, and that's part of being a tough guy. So, so I think from what I've seen in terms of the discussions on the topic, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it, but from what I've seen, it's either you are for the alpha male position, or people are saying, there's something intrinsically wrong with even talking about it. But I don't see much discussion of, and it could just be, the things I'm looking at online, but I don't see much of discussion of, let's talk about what the highest performers at any stage in history, what they will be doing. Hi, Uzair. Thanks for the recommendation. I appreciate that. And so one thing that's great about our discussion today is I think there's a space there for talking about being tough, being courageous, being powerful, not just in your life in terms of your job, your family, and so forth, but even in the larger perspective that has been there throughout history, which thankfully most people don't have to face, things like being attacked by wildlife living in the woods, or being conscripted to be forced in wars. But I think if you look at the biggest, the highest performers of all time, such as a Lincoln, such as a George Washington, Socrates, I think, okay, there's a difference there between that kind of heroic person and a lot of the images about strong, being a strong masculine male. I think there's a bunch of differences, and I don't see much discussion of that. I think even larger perspective that you get from just reading history of
Right.
these great figures. So, what do you think about that? Is that your impression that there's that gap, or I know you'll have a lot to say on that point.
Yeah, yeah. This is one good way I think I can describe this. I describe this to guys sometimes, is the idea that, let's say that you're in a bar and you had an altercation with someone, and they got up in your face and they're screaming at you and they're like, I'm gonna kick your ass, right? And they're just aggressive, yelling, right? Angry, right? And then you had another scenario where you got into altercation with someone, a different person, but this guy, he was totally calm, and he said, let's step outside. Which one are you going to be more afraid of? Right? It's
Right.
because the one, it's the one, that the guy that's really quiet, that's not angry, that's not even, that he's more dangerous, right? Because he's
Right.
been in this, because he's more powerful, because someone who is powerful doesn't have to exert power because they know it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing. And it's like, and you look at this in terms of another example I use is the king, right? Because again, this kind of comes back to anger, because guys are always telling me, "Oh, anger is a masculine trait. It's not a feminine trait. It's good to be angry, or there's righteous anger." And I get the perspective of that. I understand why guys think that. But think of a king, right? I mean, or a leader, a general that you're following into army, into battle. If he's angry, that he's not acting rational, because heck, just from a scientific standpoint, we know that the medulla part of your brain, right, that is the primal lizard brain, and that is where anger and fear, and when that part of your brain activates, it shuts off the prefrontal cortex, which is where your decision making control comes in. And so we just, from a scientific perspective, we know that when someone is experiencing anger, they are not able to the degree that they experience the anger or fear, they're not able to enact their rational mind. And so they're literally not thinking. And so I guess where I'm going with this is that a lot of guys want to think that the alpha male, the strong man, is aggressive, angry, overt displays of power. But in all instances, that is actually weakness, because the stronger you are, the less you have to display it, right? If you know that you have the power, if you know who you are, you don't have to display that. It's almost the same thing I tell guys, as far as dating. So, a lot of guys that make some money, they'll be talking to a girl and they'll say, they'll start bragging about the money they're making. And I tell them, no, do the opposite. Okay. Instead, downplay it like it's not a big deal. Like it's, you just, whatever, it's not a big deal. Like, yeah, downplay all the, that. And what's going to happen when you downplay it? That the person is going to perceive that you are more successful, because someone who is truly successful doesn't think it's a big deal. Someone
Right.
who's truly powerful doesn't think it's a big deal. Someone who's truly, quote, an alpha male doesn't think it's a big deal, because that's who they are. They don't need to prove it. If they're trying to convince you of something and trying to show you something, they don't believe it themselves. And that's kind of, I talk about this idea between the difference between arrogance and confidence. Is arrogance is trying to convince someone of something that you don't even believe about yourself, whereas
Mm.
confidence is just acting out of what you know is true, right? And so the same one person could say, I'm the greatest in the world, and it's arrogance. But a different person could say the same thing and it's confidence, because he just knows that he is. And he's not trying to prove anything. It's all about the intent behind it, not the
Right.
actual words. And and one thing also, I think that is something I constantly preach, is that the greatest gift that a man can give to this world is love. And that's a thing. That's what really makes, and a lot of guys get upset by that. They're like, no, that's not, that seems like a weak position, but it's not. Because if you think about it, what is the greatest, I mean, we as men, if we talk about masculinity, the greatest thing that we do is sacrifice our life. We think about the most noble, most masculine men. Those are the men that go into battle and fight and die. It's a sacrifice. And what is all sacrifice, right? It is rooted in love, right? You love, that's the ultimate act of love, right? If you go back to the Bible, right? Jesus Christ dies on the cross. Why? Because of love. He so loved the world, right? That so everything comes from, like, the greatest act of masculinity is actually love, even though in modern society we view things differently, and we tend to have this macho guy view of what an alpha male is, but it doesn't really hold water, right? Because the
Mhm.
strongest guys are the protectors, the guys that don't need to prove themselves, right? Any time that a guy is seeking that external validation, it's weakness. It's not coming from a place of strength. True strength doesn't need to display itself. If you truly, it's almost the same thing. Like I discuss this with some of my coaching clients as far as parenting. If you're the
Mhm.
parent, right, you don't have to yell at your child. You have all the power. You don't have to threaten them. You don't have to get upset. You could literally just take everything out of their room if you want to. Like, you have
Mhm.
all the power. So when you display anger, when you yell at them, when you do, you're actually displaying weakness. And you're getting walked. Like, if you're truly powerful, if you recognize the power you have, you don't need to display any kind of overt. So you have the ability to make the decision, to make the call, to do the thing. And that's the thing, is like, I think when you look at, if you want to find a guy that is actually uh someone who is actually masculine, he's not going to display those attributes of anger and aggressiveness. He's going to be assertive in the sense that he will have a backbone and stand up for himself and defend the people that he needs to, when he needs to. But he doesn't have to do anything to display that. And I think intrinsically we can pick up on that. We can sense when someone is a masculine character, even in in I don't watch a lot of movies, but I saw the Avengers. I always think of Thanos as a very masculine, because he's emotionally disconnected. He has his objective of what he wants to do. He has emotion, but he doesn't allow it to influence his decisions. Right? He's able to kill without emotion. Right? The same thing. I've told guys many times. I've been in several. I've been in a fair share of fights. I try to avoid the fight as much as possible. But if I do have to get into physical combat with another man, I try to harm him as little as possible, unless it's a life or death, situation. I'm gonna kill him.
Mhm.
But if I am able to disable him, then I'm not angry. I'm gonna help him up. Help get a beer. Like, I don't have any animosity, because I don't have to prove anything. You know what I mean? It's like, I think that's the thing, is that so many guys have it so twisted. They see anger, they see these other things as being masculine, but it's not about that. Because I think that the biggest thing, I think the mental shift, is realizing, what does a powerful person do,
Mhm.
right? If you had all the power, what would you do? And if you're acting in contradiction to that, then you're displaying weakness, right?
Right.
So that, I think that's the way to judge it, is to look at, if you had all the power, if you're the most powerful person, what actions would you take? How would you respond? Would you be emotional? That's the way to look at it, because anything that's the opposite of that would be weakness.
Well, no, I agree with that. And when you're having this discussion of people arguing for anger, and interestingly, I think this connects with a lot of problems in personal development. So the discussion you're having is about what is the best cause of the outcome I want.
Mhm.
So if I'm in a situation and there's a fight that happens, you think, many people naturally think, if I'm angry, then I can be more effective. And to a certain extent, for a short term, that you could say, well, yeah, that can definitely work out that way. If somebody totally is in a rage, then for a short, they can have a burst of energy because of that.
Right.
Um, and but one thing that I think this comes from is what causes people to have the best results. One approach, which actually, I did some experimentation with myself, and is And a good example of it is 10xing it, right? So I want to make $100,000 a year in my sales job. Somebody comes and says, well, that's your problem. You need to say it's 1 million, and then you'll do better. And actually, that might be a good strategy. But this idea, I call it the heroic model of personal development. That is, I want to, and this, in a way, this is connected with the anger, because you're looking for what is the cause of the outcome I want. And this is why some people will look down on reason as the best approach to, having great success in life. My view is 3 words: consistent rational action will get you everywhere you want to go in life.
Right.
But people will say, okay, no, I need energy. I need to pump myself up. And some pumping up, yourself up in certain situations can be good. But the problem with the heroic model is that it's missing, it's missing a few things. And one of them is, I think one reason, people that are saying, okay, where do I start? They should start with consistent rational action, definitely, is because for most people, the biggest problem that they face is they're not doing the most important thing, which they know they need to do every day. And that could be something that takes up a half hour. It could take up 2 minutes. Who knows? It could take up, 2 hours or 3 hours. Right. But that is the thing that most people need to be working on, because, saying I'm going to 10x it, and then you're doing a bunch of activities that could be helping you in certain ways, but you're missing the most important thing that can improve your life the best in the short term by doing that. And so, in terms of cause and effect, that's why I say, let's start with consistent rational action for, in this month, in 3 months, what's going to move your life forward the most, rather than, getting really excited and doing something totally drastically different than what you're doing. That can sometimes work. There are people like David Goggins that can say, I'm going to lose over 100 pounds in a couple of months, and challenge himself all day. I'm going to be swimming, riding a bicycle, doing weights, eating totally differently. But I think this fits into this is connected to the anger issue, because people are saying, I believe in order to become the person I want to, here's the only cause that makes sense to me. And what I think that the two of us are saying, we're saying, well, no, you can work up to a great deal of energy, hard work, and that this is a Stoic virtue, love of toil. But the best way to do that is take care of the business you need to take care of today. And then we just think it's a kind of people are in a way are thinking of a shortcut that is in some ways glamorous. Okay, in the fight, anger is going to be the decisive factor. In developing my life, okay, I'm going to do something heroic. I'm going to start 10xing it. I'm going to go ape. But I think usually for most people, that's incredibly hard to pull off.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, again, even in the perspective, like the rational approach always wins up, because even the perspective that someone might have to say that, well, if I act angry, I'll have a better result. I could invoke fear, which is true. But then why not act angry? Why actually be angry? Why not give the appearance that you're angry? Why not throw a chair across the room as a rational act, right? To just look like you're angry, to look like you mean business is serious. Then you're still working through a rational process of doing this, and you're not controlled by the emotion and controlled by the feeling. So I think that you can always come back to that. Or even, I've been to Tony Robbins events, and one of the things that he does is to put you in state, you do this, or whatever it is to do, state, to change your state, right? Jump up out of your seat. Again, you can rely on the emotional response to change your state, to get energy, Or you can use a rational response to get energy to say, hey, if I do this with my body, if I jump up, I can build energy myself from a rational perspective, like making the choice to do it, as opposed to, it's almost like you could think of it as the Incredible Hulk, right? His weakness is that he can only turn into the Hulk when he gets angry, right? So imagine how powerful he would be if he could turn into the Hulk whenever he wanted to, or turn back whenever he wanted to. But he's controlled by the emotional response. And yes, it is a weapon, but unfortunately, it's a weapon without a safety, because if you can't control it, then that means who is controlling it, right? And so it's the same thing. I tell guys all the time, it's like, if I can make you angry, I'm in control, not you're in control. You're my puppet, right? I can make you do whatever I want. I can make you dance because I can push this button. And then if I get a reaction out of you, if I push a button and you do something, I can control you, right? Because I only need a couple of buttons to move you in any direction that I want to go. And so the matter of that's why I think no matter what someone says, the rational approach is the only way that makes sense, is because any other, if there's a chink in your armor and you have an emotional response, someone can manipulate that emotional response, good or bad, and control you. And so if you really want to be sovereign over yourself, which we go, circling back to what we talked about in our original conversation about freedom, of having true freedom, is having sovereignty over yourself, then you have to be always acting in a rational perspective. You cannot ever have even if you feel like it's a short-term benefit, it's not, because it can be used against you.
Yeah, no, and that is a great point. And to add to it, connecting with what we said before, in terms of dealing with difficult people, a weapon you lose is your understanding, your understanding of what they're doing. And if you have a clear-headed approach in terms of to the situation, then you'll be more effective in terms of knowing what to do. And so I think for many people, one reason that they will poo-poo Stoicism is because the removing of passions, and by passions they meant these emotions that can't be controlled by reason. They are always excessive, and they're disproportionate to the situation. And so, and Chrysippus, the great theoretician among the Stoics, described the difference between desire or lust, where you're dying to get it, and wish, by talking about walking versus running. So if there's a dime on the street, on the sidewalk, and you run toward it, you will definitely go in the direction of the dime, but you can't literally stop on a dime if you're running. Whereas if you walk up to it, then you can just walk up to it and stop on it. Problems can be solved in a calm way, even if it's a terrifying situation or a dangerous situation. So for what we're talking about in terms of the kinds of models that I brought up, where people say, okay, there are movies where somebody's totally angry, they flip out. I don't know, for some reason, Nicolas Cage, his family always gets kidnapped or killed, and then he kind of, okay, I'm going back to my old ways. I get a couple guns and then go after the bad guys, and he's angry. Instead of those models, I think there are older models from the movies, kind of Steve McQueen or Clint Eastwood, where you're calm the whole time, where bad things are happening, but that's especially where you need your head to be on straight, rather than okay, I'm going to puff up and scare them and get angry and use that.
Yeah, I think that is a much more masculine position, like you said. The Clint Eastwood, we really think of those as masculine characters. Why? because they're unreactive, right? And I think one of the things, like you said about the stoicism, that people confuse is they think that it is just a complete lack of emotions, and it is more about the ability to quickly process emotions. To not, I always talk about there's three ways to handle emotions. You can express them, which is, diverting the river to shoot all over someone else. You
Mhm.
can repress them, which is to take all of the river into you and push it down. Or you can process them, which is to let the river flow through you. And and only one of those is a healthy way to deal with them, because that's the only way that's actually beneficial and productive. And so a stoic, it's not that a stoic doesn't feel emotions, they're just not connected, their actions aren't connected to the emotions. And the intensity is diminished, because when you bottle something up, when you express it, both of those things turn up the intensity of that emotion. Whereas when you let it process, you let it flow through you, you feel it, and then you let it go, and then it's gone. And it doesn't have to take over your rational brain. uh,
That's right.
and one thing about that, I think that's important, is is thinking about too, this idea that it's really, getting rid of negative emotions is good, obviously. And I do believe that you can pretty much eliminate negative emotions. I think if you let go of expectations on the world, on anything, then you can absolve yourself almost completely of negative emotions. I say that from firsthand experience, and since I don't really experience very many negative emotions at all, very, very,
Mhm.
since I have started that practice, which has taken time. But I think, also, I think a lot of people think that positive emotions are good, and they are better than negative emotions. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have positive emotions, but positive emotions that are tied to the external is just as bad as negative emotions that are tied to the external. Because if someone can make us happy, they can also take away that happiness and make us sad, right? And so I think that's one thing that people don't realize, is that not only do you have to insulate yourself from the negative and not allow someone to make you angry or sad or to disrupt your internal state in a negative way, but you also cannot truly allow people to be connected. Your positive state it cannot be externally dependent as well. Or
Right.
the more that you can disconnect that influence, and instead, the answer is not that you can't ever have emotions, it's that you can generate them from within yourself, right? And that's the power that we have, is that, and it goes back to what we said about reframing, right? I, if you become really good at reframing, you can turn anything into something that you're now happy about. And you can truly be happy about it and experience a positive emotion. We can choose to have positive emotions anytime that we want, through once we learn those techniques to be able to do that for ourselves. So, but yeah, I think that's an important um, uh, thing. And one thing I was going to say too is, well, actually, I was going to bring this up real quick, because Uzera said, how do you start slowly becoming less emotional, angry, and more rational? I figured I'd give kind of my perspective, and then you can give yours too, as well, David. But for me to stop becoming to less emotional and angry, I have a simple kind of drill that I do, and that I give my coaching clients, which is, I say, especially with anger, I think anger is a good one to work on, is that when you start to feel anger, uh, the first step that I want you to do is to allow it to be what it is without judgment. Just observe it. So don't try to block it. Don't shame yourself or think bad about yourself for feeling angry. Allow yourself to feel the anger and to accept it, but observe it. Say, oh, I am experiencing anger right now, right? Third party observer. Second step is now to say, okay, what is the expectation that I have right now in this moment that is unmet, that is causing this anger? So what kind of expectation do I have? And you can usually tie it to, for example, if you're driving in traffic and you need to be somewhere and you're going to be 5 minutes late because someone cut you off and there's a traffic jam, you can say that the expectation is that you expect that when you want to go somewhere and be on time, that other cars are not going to be in the road blocking your way. And the more that you can phrase this in the more ridiculous phrase as possible, the better off you're going to be, because it is ridiculous, because all expectations are ridiculous. You just have to realize how ridiculous it is. And so we can really very easily see how ridiculous it is for me to expect that other cars are not going to be on the road just because I need to be there somewhere on time, that there's not going to be a traffic jam. It's ridiculous, right? And then now that you've done that, then get rid of that expectation, realize how ridiculous it is, and then say, well, that's ridiculous. I shouldn't have that expectation, and let it go. Now the anger will subside. And in what you'll find is that if you start doing that practice constantly, when you feel a negative emotion, evaluating what is the expectation that is being met, and then why is it ridiculous, and then letting go of it, you'll start to train that into your brain. And then as soon as it happens to me all the time now, I'll get in a car and I'll be driving and something will happen. And then for a very brief second, I'll start to get a little bit irritated. I won't even get angry. I'll just get a little bit irritated. And then I'll laugh at myself. I'm like, oh, what am I irritated at? Who am I angry at? Like, what is it? And I'll let it go very, very quickly. So that's kind of my strategy. I think there's a few other things you could do, but I think that's probably the best strategy that you can start off with to start to become less emotional and angry. But yeah, David, let's let you chime in on that too.
Well, the first thing I would say is in Epictetus fashion is start with small. Start with something small that annoys you, that something around the house when somebody leaves the toothpaste cap off or whatever it is. Start with little things like that. And here's so there are different, and the foundation of this, of dealing with anger is Epictetus's point that it is not events that upset us, but it is our judgment of events. It's because you're judging them to be bad things. It's bad that, somebody, didn't put the milk back in the refrigerator. And when I give examples like this, they may sound like things that are too trivial and it's not a serious thing, but I think in the experience of all people, at some point in your life, you do get angry at ridiculously small things. So just start with the things around you. So you gave a good way of reframing it in terms of, I'm substituting one thing for another. Let me just give another one, which I call the no addition principle. And you can see this in Marcus Aurelius, meaning you're sitting there, the milk is not in the refrigerator, and just observe the situation, but don't allow observe what is before you in your perception, but just delay on making any judgment about it. As it's about to come up, just say, oh, there's milk on the counter. There's milk on the, and keep it, if you throw in some description in your mind, just keep it descriptive and not normative, saying, good, bad, outrageous, or anything like that. I told you not to do that, you jerk, anything like that. Just, there's milk on the counter. And then by delaying, and it could be just a couple seconds of delaying, don't allow yourself to have that judgment. Don't, no addition to what's already there in terms of what you're experiencing. That could be enough to cool you down. And then, part of the reason you're doing this with ordinary small things is because the next time there's a situation at work when someone's doing something at a mid-level of annoyance, you can start to do it there too. And, it's not that you have to go in a particular order, but everybody can do it, succeed at it with the small things if you give it a chance.
Yeah, that's a good take on that. I agree. That's a good place to start. Let me see. There was a question, or actually a statement here. The comeback that he said that having 4 kids under 6, it's hard to not expect things or want a level of control, respect from them. So I think that's one thing that's worth clarifying, is what is an expectation. versus, and that's why what I always say is that expectations are things you have on other people, or burdens you put on other people. Standards are things you have for yourself. And so all expectations
That's a good
on
one.
the external are not good. They do not avail you anything. So if you have kids, right, and you should not expect them to behave in a certain way. You can have a standard for their behavior. That's your standard. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you as a parent. So, for example, I have my daughter, right? She she has to be at school, ready to go to school, for my fiance to drive her to school by 7:40 a.m. Okay, I told her that's her responsibility. All right. I do not expect her to get up and be ready to go by 7. She has a set of things she has to do by 7:40. Right, has to brush her teeth, be dressed, all these things, right, packed and stuff, and that's the cutoff. She needs to be there at 7:40 and tell my fiance, okay, it's time to go. I don't expect her to ever succeed at doing that. I don't expect her to set an alarm. I don't expect her to wake up. I have no expectation at all. Right. I have a standard that if she doesn't do that, then she has to wait till I'm done with my meeting or wherever, and I'm free, and I will personally drive her to school, and then I will take her in, and she will explain why she was late to her class, and it will embarrass her. That's my standard.
Right.
If she wants to be late and have me do that and to suffer the consequences, I don't care. I'm not angry. I'm not upset. I'm totally fine with it. I have no expectation. So she can't make me angry in that respect. And there's a lot of other things I have for her that are standards. I have rules around the house, standards that she needs to behave in order to get certain things or privileges, or she'll lose things. But they're all standards that I have for myself as a parent raising a child, that a child of mine will do these things. They're not expectations on her, because and the way to figure out if you're putting an expectation on someone is if you'll be emotionally upset if they do something opposite than that, right? So I even tell guys a lot of times, because I was like, well, shouldn't I have the expectation that my girlfriend doesn't cheat on me? No. Who said? She's an NPC also running code. And if you put the expectation that she doesn't cheat on you and then she cheats on you, your whole life is going to be destroyed, and you're going to be upset, and you can't control her. If you can control your own self and your own thoughts, so you can have an expectation on yourself, I suppose, if you want to, but you can't control that. But what you could do is you could have a standard that says, if my girlfriend cheats on me, I'm not going to be in a relationship with someone who cheats on me. That's a standard that you can have. But to have an expectation on someone, to think that they're going to behave, I mean, you can be pretty sure that this person is going to treat you right and not do those things, but you can't know it, and you can't expect it, because once you start expecting things, you're setting yourself up. You're now tying your happiness and your internal state with the external world. So anytime that you have made it so that if someone does something, then you're going to have an emotional reaction, you'd be disappointed, you have created an expectation. So you have to get rid of all those and just have standards, because the only thing, and the reason why standards work is because standards are things that you are in control of. You can make standards for yourself. You can't make them for other people. You're violating someone else's boundary when you're trying to coerce them to behave a certain way, right? They can do what they want to do, just like you have the autonomy to do what you want to do. But you can have standards for yourself of, if someone acts this way, this is how I will act. This is how I will respond. Those are the things that you can do, because anything else will be an exercise in frustration, because you'll never be able to control the external world. You'll never be able to control what other people do. And you'll just be subjecting yourself to disappointment constantly. And you'll have to live in fear because you don't know. So that's kind of my answer to that one.
Well, no, it's interesting. That I really love that idea of no expectations, but you have your standard, you have your policy, and then so you know what you're basically setting up a structure so you don't have to think about it. Right. And so if you want people to do things, then the outcome is going to create suspense, especially if it's something important to you. I told you to be up ready for this. That's my. Now, what you said about other people is very interesting, because So yes, you do have to recognize other people are not in your power. And there's one mark of wisdom that I think is very interesting in Stoicism. You can find it as Marcus, you can find it in Seneca. And Marcus literally says, if you are wise, you cannot be surprised at anything that happens. And that sounds crazy and the reason it sounds crazy to us is because what we want to do is we want to come to a judgment about another person that we're friends with, related to, we're involved with romantically. We want to come to a judgment with some kind of feeling of certainty that this will never happen. Right. So the question is, how do you deal with this? And so I think you've got the idea by now, John, that I'm not one of those philosophers who doesn't apply my thinking to what's going on in life. I'm really trying to figure out, how do I do this whole thing, living life? And at some point of doing a lot of philosophy, relationships, friendships, family members, I started to become surprised when someone would get on the witness stand and say something like, this is a good person, they would never do it.
Right.
Because how do they know it? And so over time, this is one of those beautiful things that, it seems like an amazing coincidence, but I developed this idea over time. It fits into Stoicism perfectly. When I'm dealing with other people, what I do is I find out a bunch of things that appear a certain way. This person appears to be a nice person. They appear to be good. They tell me some belief that they have, and I say, that appears to fit with, the worldview they tell me they have. But throughout this whole process of, interacting with people, sometimes even over years, I am suspending a final judgment of who they really are. And one of the things I do that's very fast, I've had really fascinating results from is by noticing when they do something that seems a little off, or it could be something that they bring up, a lot, okay, about themselves or something that's bothering them. When something seems a little off in terms of the picture, I just add that to the data set. So over time, a kind of picture is forming, but I'm never saying this person will never do me wrong. This person is a really good person, and so forth. And I don't have to. But what I have to do is I have to say, I'm having all these appearances, the picture is changing over time. And this is, people get frustrated with ancient philosophers like the Stoics and with Socrates to a certain extent, because I don't know, because we want to know.
Right.
But by suspending a final determination, I leave room for them to do things that that would otherwise be unexpected. Because the things that seem a little off, oftentimes, and about relationships, I don't know what your experience has been, but at some point I came up with the theory, the things I needed to know, the signs were there within the first month or so. I just didn't want to, go any deeper with those, because we want it to work. We want to be happy. But it's not, for some people, they may say this is not a pain-free process, but for me, just sitting back and saying, okay, I'm seeing this, and then, that is a little strange that they did that or said that. That's a little off key. Just saying, okay, well, that's part of the whole picture. That's a good way not to be surprised, especially when it comes to those points where somebody does something that seems totally crazy, and you're saying, I thought I knew this person, but that's the problem. You wanted more than the information permitted you to claim or to judge, from your experience with them.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of that too is like I like the idea that you're adding what they're doing to this data set that you have, because people forget that people change over time and change is usually gradual. And as you keep on adding things to that data set, you can start to see the things shifting in that direction of whatever direction that they're going. And that person could be changing. So they're not constant. They're not, just like all of us are evolving, some to the bad, some to the good. And the other aspect of it too, I think that's important is uh, is to realize that and this is maybe just another fundamental belief that I have, or philosophy I live by, is that I don't believe anything. I only have probabilities of belief, right? So everyone gets upset about this one, but I'll say it for you guys. I'm ready for the comment section. Is that I don't believe that the Earth is round.
Mhm.
I think there's a 99.99% probability that it is, but there are still some small percentage that those flat earthers are right. I don't know. It's like it could be. There's a lot of ways that could be. But the reason why I do that, and again, I can apply that to people, right? So you could say I am 99.9% sure that my spouse won't cheat on me. Okay, that's good. That's fine. That's still not a belief, right? Because once you have a belief, then you are tied to the belief, right? If I say I'm 100% sure of something, if I believe something, as instead of having a probability of belief, then it's a personal attack on me if someone refutes that, because it's now part of my identity. But if I said that I'm 75% sure and 25% not sure of this outcome, and you say oh, it's going to be the 25%. Okay, well, there's a 1 in 4 chance. All right, it's probable. It's unlikely, but it's still a possibility. And so so I apply that to people as well. And then I think the other thing that is useful is to say, if this happens, right, why is it good? Like ahead of time, right? Because a lot of times we talked about reframing things that happen to us, that bad things into good things. But what about reframing the possibility, right? So in the instance of, oh, I want to have an expectation that my girlfriend doesn't cheat on me. Okay, we can flip it to a standard, but you can also say, okay, well, what if she does? Then why would that be good? And one obvious reason is because now you'll have found out that you're with someone who's different than what you thought they were, and
Right.
you'll be able to end that and not waste another 10 years or whatever it is. You'll be able to save the rest of your life and time not being with someone who in their mind was unfaithful. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of ways to, or just accepting the bad outcome, which again the Stoics talk about a lot. But then you don't have to have that expectation on the person, because you can say, well, if they do this, then this will happen and life will go on, and I'm okay with that as well. And then we don't feel as pressured, or as worried about the instability of having to have certainty in another person's actions, because we never can. There are circumstances in which every single one of us would kill.
Right.
There's circumstances in which we would do things that would seem uncharacteristic to us, but those things do. That probability always exists. But that's what I'm saying, is like the only way that we can really be comfortable is if we can explore that probability and then say, if that happened, then I would be okay with that.
Right. And that is that rehearsal of adversities, that is an important exercise for the Stoics, that you see, okay, because people get upset because they're fired because they think that's bad, that's shameful. There's other bad things that are going to come with it. But even if they've, for 10 minutes at a time, 3 times before it happens, just play with the idea and think about it. Spend 10 minutes thinking, okay, well, what would happen if I did that? But people are afraid to do that, even in their own minds. And in a way, it's understandable, because it could sound really scary. But once you make it a practice of such a kind of rehearsal in your mind, then you say, then you start to figure things out. You start to say, notice things that you wouldn't have noticed, such as, well, then I could go, into a totally different career. Another point related to this, Seneca says, and he talks about a beautiful city, which is in France, being burned down, and so he talks about the idea of, I am ready for everything, and the way that I do that is by, I don't think about just what is probable about to take place. I think of everything that can take place, and so for because we don't like to think about something like when we come back from a trip to the grocery store, there are 4 thugs in our place, right? Robbers or something like that. But thinking about such things can be very useful because something that's less threatening could happen, and by going through the rehearsal, right, you will be more better equipped to deal with it. One particular thing. This is a tip I gave in terms of how to be more productive in your job and have a much smoother flow of action for your job, for any given day. And I call it occupational turbulence. And so if you think about being on a flight, when there's turbulence, you notice that the captain will tell you we're hitting some turbulence, and then say a couple things, and then they sign off. So if it's really bad, people on the plane could be pretty scared. They could think this is it. I have to, what's going to happen to my family, things like that. But the pilot is never afraid. Now, why is that? They've been trained to deal with it. They've been through it many times before. It's at a ho-hum level, right? So they're despising that thing that's external to them. That's just a part of life. It's one of those things that happens. But also they know for a fact that there is almost zero probability that the turbulence alone will crash the plane. Right. Okay, so now that's a dramatic thing, but here's what I tell people to do for their jobs. Write down the 5 things that you least want to happen, that you least like at work.
Right.
Okay? And so, if you're a server, if you're a waiter, it could be things like when people order something and, they order a steak, you come back with a steak and they say, I want a chicken. You wrote it down right away. They're wrong. And, it just drives you crazy just to take that. And something else, when someone skips work, you're given too many tables. So write down the 5 things that you don't like to happen. That's all that is required. And what you do is you call those occupational turbulence, the things that happen on a regular basis, print that out, and then before you go to work, those things are going to happen.
Right.
And those are going to happen. And then when one of them does happen, there it is. You could actually get a little laugh out of it, and it doesn't throw you off. So that's a formula I took from, because there's a bunch of things that are very low probability of happening. That's why you have to think about everything. But for the things that happen all the time, people will on a regular basis be reactive to them, and they'll get angry that it happened. But if you set out in advance, okay, these are the 5 things that happen on a regular basis, it's going to happen today, it totally diffuses it of any emotional energy. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's kind of like you're saying about even the milk, right? You can almost think about it as like, let's say that your child always leaves the milk out of the refrigerator, right? But it happens all the time. Yet we still expect it to not happen and then get angry about it, right? It's almost like, like if you said, hey, I expect that the milk will be left out of the fridge, then you're not going to, you can still deal with it, but you're not going to be angry about it. It's almost like, how are we shocked at the things that happen over and over again, and that we're shocked,
Right.
and we allow ourselves to be angry and to be, and those are the things that actually cause probably the most anger and actually the most friction in relationships. It's like, you always do this, and then it's like, but that, yes, if that's true, then why is it a surprise? Why is it a shock? Right? Because you haven't prepared yourself for it, because you haven't gone through that step. And I think what you're saying is absolutely right, because if you take that little step of just thinking about it ahead of time, and then instead of being shocked by the stuff that is commonplace and happens all the time or is likely to happen, expect that, then you'll put yourself in a much better state when it does occur, rather than constantly being reactive to that. But it does take practice, I think, to be able to implement any of these things. It's a constant practice, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying before about the training. Is it's, if you want to be able to do this and really improve your life through Stoic philosophy, you have to see it as a training that you have to be excited about, the opportunity to train, right?
Right.
And so when you see obstacles, when you see these things that you have to deal with a difficult person, it's an opportunity. When you have to deal with some adversity, it's an opportunity. It's because it's your opportunity to train your Stoic principles and to get better at them. Because if you don't have any waves, you're not going to have any kind of training. You're not going to have the sufficient stimulus for you to adapt. But the more that you get that training, the more that you adapt, and seeking it out too, I think is the things. Go out and seek out the things that are going to be hard for you. When you have a difficult coworker, that's a good thing. That's a great opportunity. You're blessed to have a difficult coworker that can train you to be more stoic. I mean, I'm excited for you. That's the perspective that I think people have to take for themselves if they want to benefit from it. Because I think a lot of people, I mean, Seneca talked about it too, is like about people who are philosophers who read philosophies and memorize every line of books, but they didn't execute and implement them in their lives, so it availed them nothing, and they never developed their own life philosophy either, which is important. But that's the key, is putting it into practice and seeing it as an opportunity, and that's what I had to do. I think when I and I constantly still have to do it. I constantly still have to look at it and say, okay, why is this good? Why is this an opportunity? How am I using this to train myself to be to be better and to be more stoic? So,
Well, and John, just to add one point about something you said that I think is very important, and it's something that I take as an important part of what I do, and that is by the end of working with me, you're going to be developing your own philosophy. Mm-hmm. Because here's one thing about accepting human nature. Now, so there's all these different people in personal development. There's all these great philosophers, different religions you can follow, and what each of us does want in one way is somebody to tell us, here's exactly what to do. And so what I want to do is I want to give people the best things I know in terms of advancing their lives and breaking Stoicism down to the key elements and drawing from all these different directions that that maybe some of the more popular pop Stoics won't get into. But one thing I want people to do is to start working on your own philosophy, because that's the one that's part of why it's fun for us, John, because when we get in these situations, it's because of your own way of formulating things and thinking about them, that you're all the more eager to say, oh, this guy's a jerk, this is a great opportunity. Whereas if everything you do is based on what some great philosopher or some brilliant coach said, it's not going to be as good. So I like, I love the idea of, okay, so everything I say, everybody will do, but that's not part of human life. Everybody's going to want to do things their own way, but by working with someone who's interested in philosophy, because learning to put out your own theories, which I see you've done a lot, yourself in terms of developing your own philosophy, starting with that from day one, you're going to build your own philosophy, and because you're going to do that anyway. Anything that you've gotten into, like Tony Robbins or Seneca, you're putting John Somnes into it too, because you've had different experiences. You're seeing things from a different perspective, and then that's what makes your philosophy all the more powerful, because it's coming out of you.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And guys, in fact, I'm sure you've seen the banner scrolling by, but if you want to get coaching from David, his email address is right there. It's dcaspar at highperformancestoicism.com. It's down at the bottom there. You can see it. And then David also has a Facebook group called Stoic Practices for Success. So you can just request to join that Facebook group, and and really get the wisdom that David's been sharing here. He also has a course that'll be coming out pretty soon. If you're interested in the course, then definitely email him, or or sign up at the Facebook group as well, and get in there, and you'll get more info on this. But yeah, I just want to make sure I mentioned that. But yeah, you're absolutely right, David, about that perspective. Yeah, it's been good conversation. I guess we should probably get wrapping this up here in a little bit here, but
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
that was a really excellent discussion.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. Yeah, we'll have to definitely do more of these. Yeah, I feel like these are the things that that people really need, because it's just like, I think one thing I think as a parent between the two of us is that both of us have taken kind of the philosophies, just like you said, that we've read from Stoics, from different sources, but then we've synthesized our own, we've expanded upon it, we've created our own version of it and our own perspective on it, which is important, because that's how you really synthesize and understand. You go from knowledge to understanding to wisdom. I think is that path. Knowledge is just hearing the thing and knowing it, and then understanding is putting into practice. And wisdom is when you actually expand upon it and understand it intricately, where you're developing your own philosophy. And most of these things, I think most of the solutions I've kind of figured out in life after listening to other people and hearing some ideas are things that I just sat and thought about myself as I was trying to practically apply those things. And I think not enough people just sit and think and ruminate on these ideas, because we're so occupied with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and email and all this stuff, or even just reading too much or listening to too many videos or watching too many videos, instead of just sitting and thinking, what do I think about this? Why does this make sense? Because like all of the things that I've talked about anger and whatnot, those are things that I sort of sussed out for myself and figured out something that made sense, that applied, that worked, that but so I appreciate that you've also done the same thing, and you can tell by all the frameworks that you have, and so yeah. So guys, if you're interested in getting some coaching, like I said, from David, definitely shoot him an email, and you'll be in good hands. Uzair had said here that he had done coaching with David. I'm trying to find the method. Yeah, he said that he had done David's coaching and it helped him overcome one of his biggest bad habits. So, all right.
Thanks a lot, John.
Yeah. Good talking to you. Take care.